So this video is about dress code. So if you're tired of me speaking about dress code in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, unfollow, unfriend, scroll down, because I'm gonna keep talking about this until my last breath, because it's my humble opinion that dress code is, aside from the obviously horrendous things like, child abuse and other topics, dress code is, assuming everything else is basically okay, dress code is the biggest issue in spreading Krishna consciousness in the modern Western world. I'll repeat that again. I think dress code is the biggest issue in spreading Krishna consciousness outside of the Indian diaspora in the Western world. The other day I was speaking to a friend about Protestant Christianity, the model of dress code that Protestant Christianity offers to the world, especially again in North America, Canada, Germany, England, and whatever denomination you're talking about, basically Protestant Christianity is a uniform, less tradition, including the priests. I'll tell you why this is important, because I'm trying to see what's the equivalent today in modern society in terms of different religious models, putting aside their theology, their beliefs. What's the religious model today that most resembles the model that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as a GRIHASTHA, established along with his associates here where I am right now in Sridham, Mayapur, when he began the Sankirtan movement, right? So I think it's our duty to try to apply the principles as much as possible of the Sankirtan movement, especially with Lord Chaitanya as a grihastha, as a householder, given that, in Krishna consciousness, you're allowed to get married, you're allowed to have children, you're even encouraged to do so. I mean, Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, he forbids sannyas for the age of Kali. So it's definitely a family-friendly, grihastha-friendly, world-embracing, to quote Garuda Prabhu, a world-embracing type of spiritual tradition. It's not an ascetic type of spiritual tradition. It's not even a type of religious tradition like the Catholic Church, or what to speak of the Zen Buddhists, or the Catholics or the Zen Buddhists or the Mayavadis, where, for example, we hear Mayavadis would say, first take sannyas, then speak of Siddhanta, right, or Vedanta. Or the Catholics where, a grihastha, householder, cannot have access to God unless, he goes through the sacred via medium of a priest, right, who's celibate. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a guru or gurus, but I'm trying to see where it's not that we shouldn't have gurus, but they should be a monk, right? In the Catholic Church, you have no access to God save and except through the via medium of a celibate monk, basically a brahmacharya or sannyasi. But you look at Lord Chaitanya's grihastha pastimes in Navadvipa, which again I think are most relevant to 99% of Iskcon members today, precisely because 99% of Iskcon members today are householders, right? So while we worship and obviously we take inspiration from Lord Chaitanya's sannyas pastimes, his own example as a grihastha is most relevant to 99% of Iskcon members today. And so when you look at Lord Chaitanya in Navadvipa, right, as a grihastha, and you see he's a Brahmin, so Brahmins technically, right, are the ones who are kind of like the gurus, the priests of society. Now, of course, in Vaishnavism, there's an extra little added important fact, kiba vipra kibanyasi shudra keneno ye Krishna Tatvaveta se guru hoy, that no matter what varna you're from, what ashram you're from, if you know Krishna, you can be a guru. So unlike more strict type of varnashram adherent traditions in India, where only the Brahmins can, for example, initiate, only the Brahmins can worship the deity, only the Brahmins can give, Bhagavad Kathas and speak about God. In the Vaishnava tradition, I mean, you have all, Narottam Das Thakur was an inconceivably powerful, we believe, acharya, and he didn't come from a Brahmin family. As a matter of fact, he initiated young men from Brahmin caste, and their parents flipped out, right? And then, of course, you have the example par excellence of Haridas Thakur, who's not even within the Varnashram scheme, right? An untouchable Muslim. You got Ramananda Roy, who's technically a Shudra because he's working as a government officer. King Prataparudra, who's a king, who's a Kshatriya. Kulavitra Sridhar, who's a poor Vaishya, and they're all pure devotees, right? So there's this cross sectionality of pure devotion, cutting through all varnas and all ashrams. Having said that, you look at Lord Chaitanya as Nimai Pandit, right? And you look at his associates in Navadvipa, and I'm going to get to the Christian Protestant thing and how this relates to dress code, especially in North America, so please have patience with me here. This is so important. This is so important for the future. I mean, if we think, as I said in a reel recently, showing, the interview with Bhagavan in that three-segment documentary called Guns, Karma, and Krishnas, about Kirtanananda and all that nonsense that went on in New Vrindavan. He was saying that we were very much in the monastic mode. Like back then in the 70s, you became a devotee. You have to move into a temple. You have to shave your head. You have to have a little ponytail in the back if you're a man. If you're a woman, you have to put on a sari, right? All except for the sannyasis and brahmachari, that era is over, and we're still like clinging on to it and thinking that, Krishna is more pleased as a grihastha male if I wear a dhoti and if I still shave my head with a little ponytail, when that's not even a Vaishnava symbol. It's a Brahminical symbol. But our acharyas have established from day one that Vaishnavism is way superior to Brahmins. Vaishnava is greater than a Brahmin by light years, right? So anyway, closing the parenthesis, you look at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Navadvipa, and you see him dressed before he becomes a devotee and after he becomes a devotee. We believe it's a Leela, of course. We believe that, of course, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, playing the role of a devotee, right? So you see how he's dressed before and after his conversion. That's really important. Before his conversion, he's got long hair. He wears the typical standard dress of a Brahmin or a Hindu in general, not of a Vaishnava. The dhoti that he wears, right, and the dhoti that all his associates wear, and the dhotis that the non-Vaishnava, even demoniac residents of Navadvipa at the time, those who wanted to literally almost, kill Srivas Thakur, those who wanted to put Srivas Thakur's house into the Ganga, right, those who cursed the Vaishnavas because they were making too much noise with their kirtan, all of them wear dhotis, all of them, right? The pure, exalted, eternal associates of the Lord, including the Lord himself, as well as the non-devotee, envious, non-devotees. They're all wearing dhotis, right? They're all wearing this. So what does that mean? That means that there is no religious uniform that distinguishes the Vaishnavas at the time. That's super, let that sink in. At the time of Lord Chaitanya, and even we can go back all the way to the time of the Mahabharata, right? The Pandavas, Draupadi, Kunti did not distinguish themselves from the demoniac entities surrounding them in human forms by the way they dressed. Let that sink in again. The history shows that the Vaishnavas do not distinguish themselves from the rest of society by the way they dress, right? Lord Chaitanya dresses like the standard, normal dress of people who wear whatever they wear in West Bengal 500 years ago. That's a fact. He goes to Gaya, he meets his guru, he has a, Krishna's God moment, comes back to Navadvipa, the Chaitanya Bhagavat describes, as a humble new devotee. All the Vaishnavas are delighted. Finally, Nimai Pandit, that great attractive scholar whom we were praying would become a devotee, has finally become a devotee, right? And does he change the way he dresses? No. Now you could say, well, no, but he was wearing a dhoti and that's the Vedic culture. But what are we as Vaishnavas spreading? And what is Vedic culture, right? If a prostitute in Dhaka or New Delhi or Calcutta wears a sari when she sells her body, if a butcher, in South India is killing, chickens and goats and God forbid even cows while wearing a dhoti, what is so Vedic about a dhoti or a sari, right? And what are we representing? Are we representing greater Indian culture as Western Vaishnavas, or are we representing Krishna Bhakti? So, Nimai Pandit becomes a devotee. There's no sign whatsoever of him changing his dress into a Vaishnava dress because there's no such thing as a Vaishnava dress. He may start wearing tulsi because that's a Vaishnava symbol, which Rupa Goswami mentions in Nectar of Devotion. He may start wearing tilak because that's a Vaishnava symbol, which Rupa Goswami mentions in the Nectar of Devotion or Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Rupa Goswami doesn't mention dhoti or saris, right? So, now coming back to the Christian Protestant. So, and let me add one thing before we go to the Christian Protestant model. We could make the argument that across India, there is no such thing as a religious uniform for any sect, any tradition. And let me tell you why. Because again, traditionally, the Brahmins are the ones who are, the spiritual leaders of society, whether they're Shaivites or Smartas or Vaishnavas or whatever, right? Whatever tradition those Brahmins are from. Now, Brahmins are, what do they wear traditionally? A dhoti, maybe a chadar, right? Or bare-chested with a Brahmin thread. Now, historically, you see when the Brahmin goes on the altar, right, or sits on a vyasasana to give a lecture, he is dressed exactly in the same clothes that he wears when he does non-religious activities, such as, going to the market and buying vegetables, or playing with his kid in the courtyard of his house, or whatever he may be doing. He's wearing the same clothes on the altar as off the altar. Let that sink in. In every single Hindu tradition that you see in India, the Brahmins, when they actually do the religious thing, when they, do the class or worship or perform the yajna, they're not changing into some sort of ritualistic uniform. They're wearing the same clothes that they wear, again, when they are doing quote-unquote ordinary things, right? So you could claim that across all the Hindu Vedic traditions, they distinguish themselves by external symbols like horizontal tilak, for example, for the Shaivites, right? Or wearing Rudraksha beads instead of Tulsi beads and so on, but not by the way they dress. There is no distinguishing clothes that defines a particular sect of Hinduism in India. Now, let's go back to Protestant Christianity versus, for example, the Catholic tradition. Now, in the Catholic tradition, again, first of all, it's just the monks. It's just the brahmacharis and sannyasis who have, ecclesiastical power, who have the power to be a guru, for example, right? Because, you can't be a priest in the Catholic Church unless you are a monk, right? And same thing with the Mayavadis, right? Take sannyas, then talk of Vedanta. And what to speak of the Zen Buddhists. You can't become a Zen master unless you become a monk. So in those models, you see that there's like this rule that you have to be a celibate monk. And of course, monks always have a uniform. So let them wear, their saffron robes or whatever. But that model, again, does not jive with Lord Chaitanya's example as a GRIHASTHA spiritual master. Or as a matter of fact, as most Hindu traditions where most Brahmins are married, you see, and yet are gurus. Right? In the Gaudiya tradition, you see most of the acharyas are grihasthas. They're grihasthas. Most of our gurus are grihasthas, right? Or at least many of them. So the Catholic model does not jive, does not correspond to Lord Chaitanya's own example in Navadvipa. So what other models are there in the West that may resemble? Well, again, Protestant Christianity, Because in Protestant Christianity, not only are the grihasthas allowed to be gurus, right? Most pastors, as they call them, are householders, right? So very similar to Hinduism in general and very similar to Gaudiya Vaishnavism where, most of the gurus, most of the acharyas are grihasthas, right? Are allowed to get married and be spiritual leaders. And secondly, most Protestant Christian traditions have no uniform imposed on the congregation. Even the Catholics don't do that. Even the Catholics don't impose a religious uniform upon its congregation. Can you imagine the Pope all of a sudden saying, you know what, guys, from now on, every Catholic in the world should come to church on Sunday dressed like Palestinians dressed, 2,000 years ago at the time of Jesus. Otherwise, they always will remain second-class members of our church. That's right. But that's where Iskcon is in the West. Iskcon is still at that point where they're imposing a religious uniform that belongs to a whole different country from a whole different era upon its congregation members. And you have the extreme example, in my opinion, of that in Russia or Ukraine, where you literally have changing rooms in every temple, and where congregation members show up, right? They show up carrying a backpack with their dhotis and their saris when it's like minus 30 outside, right? And they show up in their warm winter clothes with a backpack, and then they go into a changing room in the back of the temple. And there they somehow, are managed to put on their saris and their dhotis to do what? To simply participate as passive participants in the service, as congregation members. Chant, Haribol, Haribol, sit down, take some prasadam, listen to a lecture, go home. Right? And in order to do that, they are pressured to show up with their Indian clothes from subtropical West Bengal, when it's minus 30 outside, and they have to change in a changing room just to, as a congregation member. Do you see the madness? Do you see the madness? I mean, it's just unbelievable. Unbelievable. So, imposing a religious uniform upon a whole congregation. Even the Catholics don't do that. But their priests, have to be monks, and to have a religious uniform. But the Protestants, again, the Protestant Christians, GRIHASTHAs, most of them, and no uniform. You see the biggest pastors, and again, put aside the fact that they eat meat, which is a tragedy. Put aside that they're sectarian, most of them, in their views about God, and and unfortunately they don't understand or believe as we do that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God. Putting that aside, when they show up and stand behind that pulpit with their Bible in their hand, preaching the good word, right? What are they wearing? They're wearing the exact same clothes that the first person in the first row listening to them is wearing. In other words, no uniform. Does that look like Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan Grihastha pastimes in Navadvipa? Hell yes. Hell yes. So, to conclude, Prabhupada said, look at the Catholic Church, how they do their things. Well, maybe that applies to the brahmacharis and the sannyasis of Iskcon, which, constitute a tiny percentage of Iskcon membership. But if Prabhupada was here, I would say, Prabhupada, actually for Grihasthas, and now that your movement is 99% a Grihastha movement, I would humbly suggest that they look at how the Protestant Christians do their thing, because that model seems to be the closest, the one that resembles the most Lord Chaitanya's Grihastha pastimes in Navadvipa before he takes sannyas. And since most of your followers, Srila Prabhupada, are Grihasthas, it would behoove them to look at the example, the golden, perfect example that Lord Chaitanya, the golden avatar, set by his own personal example, along with his eternal associates, who are all practically Grihasthas, in Navadvipa. And I assume that Prabhupada would say yes, yes, yes. So, conclusion, what's the big FD? What's the big fucking deal, as a professor of mine at University of California used to say? The big F deal is that there's a monumental difference between a religious group or a religion that imposes a religious uniform on its priests versus a religious group that has no uniform for its priests. Already there's a huge difference. What to speak of the monumentally huge, abysmal difference between a model which imposes a religious uniform not only on its priests, but on its freaking congregation members, right? Like the Sikhs or the Hasidic Jews or the Amish, or the Mennonites, which is not at all what you see in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, because again, the Vaishnavas in Navadvipa did not distinguish themselves from the non-Vaishnavas by the way they dressed. And a model, again, where everyone, including the priests, don't have a uniform, where there's just no uniform, where the standard is just the mode of goodness. And that's what Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita. Mode of goodness, engage in Krishna's service. That's bhakti. So we really, and when I say we, I'm talking about, African American, Latino, white, and, even smaller minorities in the Western countries. I would also say, including Russia and Ukraine, but, they've got the Orthodox Christian tradition there as the main standard. And there, even though the Grihasthas can dress, can get married, and the Grihasthas can be gurus, they have, Orthodox Grihastha priests. They have a really big, uniform with the beard and the black dress and all that. But I would say that's, again, not what you see in Navadvipa with Lord Chaitanya. So I'm actually so happy that Protestant Christianity, putting aside theology, but Protestant Christianity is the closest model to Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, his Grihastha pastimes, the example he set in Navadvipa, and we could even say, Vaishnavism in general. There is no religious uniform for a congregation, and there is not even a religious uniform for the Grihastha priests. And so therefore, what does that mean in today's America, today's Canada? It means that householder gurus should be allowed, and actually should, if they're intelligent, I would say, for the preaching, dress like everybody else in America or Canada dresses. Of course, the mode of goodness tier, not the sloppy, dirty mode of ignorance style of dressing, but just normal dressing. That's Lord Chaitanya's movement. That's Sankirtan. That's the equivalent in today's society of Lord Chaitanya's Grihastha pastimes in Navadvipa. Prove me wrong. Please prove me wrong. I'm willing to change. I really am willing to change my mind. Prove me wrong about what I just said. So if we continue believing that, we should pressure our new bhaktas and our new devotees, and our initiated grihasthas to, doty up and shave up, and at least for their initiation ceremony, at least for their weddings, at least on Janmashtami, at least on the Sunday feast, at least when they give a lecture. And let's not even talk about what goes on the altar, because, that'll really freak out some conservatives here. Or, I consider myself conservative, but let's say traditionalists, dress code speaking wise. As long as we're pressuring new members of Iskcon in the West who don't come from an Indian background, and even those who come from an Indian background, because, who wants to be relegated to irrelevance, right? I don't want to dress like my great-grandfather. I'm an Indian immigrant, or my father came from India, and I was born in America as an Indian, Indian body, American. American confused Deshi, and I don't want to, I want to fit in. So even Indians, born in America, if we continue preaching this idea that you have to wear, preferably wear Indian clothes, right, as a householder, and if our householder leaders continue by their own body language, our Iskcon temple president, Grihastha temple presidents, with their shaved head and their shika and their little white dhoti and their little white kurta. Hey, dress however you want. I'm not, dress however you want. That's the bottom line. I'm just saying that's not a strategic way to do it. That's not a strategic way to actually reach the heart of local whites, blacks, Latinos, etc. in North America. It's just not the way to do it. Or it's just a very complicated way to do it. It's just adding extra weight in your sneakers when you're trying to run. Or it's literally like stabbing yourself in the leg when you're, when you're trying to run. It's just self-sabotaging. So ultimately, of course, dress however you want. Because I know some devotees can why do you judge? Let devotees dress however you want. Of course, dress however you want. As Bhakti Tirtha Swami say, wear freaking diapers if you want to try to spread Krishna consciousness. All I'm saying is good luck. You want to spread Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement as a grihastha, as a white, black, Latino grihastha in North America to, other whites, Latinos, and blacks. Good luck if you keep your shaved head and a little ponytail and wear your white Middle Eastern kurta and white robes. Good luck. Because of your purity, Krishna may send you some souls, as we see that he does. But boy, he would send you so many more if you just dress like everybody else did, exactly like Lord Chaitanya, the Grihastha Nimai Pandit did in Navadvipa 500 years ago, right? And we see it. You can say, well, where's your proof? The proof is you see whichever householder guru in North America makes that little adjustment in terms of his appearance. When he preaches, you see monumental difference in terms of preaching results with the local community. Look at Kaustubha and Raghunath in their Wisdom of the Sages podcast, right? And when they're in America, I went to a class where Kaustubha was giving a class the day before Rath Yatra at the Bhakti Center in New York, and he was speaking about very esoteric things, about the feelings of separation from the Radharani and the gopis towards Krishna. So he was dressed in jeans, but they were clean. Don't get me wrong. We're not talking mode of ignorance. They were clean jeans, a perfectly clean white T-shirt, but yet he was dressed like everybody else sitting in the audience, right? He was dressed like Lord Chaitanya dressed in Navadvipa, as everybody else dressed in Navadvipa who were not devotees. Right? And you see the result. They have monumentally larger success with local communities than, the likes of Kalakanta or Vaisheshika, who are great souls, but it's just frustrating, or Mahatma Prabhu, who are successful, but in my opinion, and as we see already with the Kastubas, with the Raghunaths, with other devotees in North America, whose names I may not remember right now, who are making a point as Grihasthas to represent Lord Chaitanya dressed in normal Western clothes, and if they're courageous, they want to put some tilak and tulsi beads, let them do that, no problem. You see the result. The percentage of blacks, whites, Latinos who actually come forward to Iskcon is much, 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 much greater than those who come, to take shelter of exalted souls, grihasthas, but who still wear their white dhotis and their white kurtas and their shaved heads and their ponytails, like the Vaisheshika Prabhus, like the Mahatmas. And again, I'm not criticizing them. I'm lamenting. These great souls deserve to have thousands of white, black, Latino disciples, but instead they just have a handful, and all the others are from India. And again, I'm not minimizing their Indian disciples. They're great souls too, but let's talk demographics here, right? These Grihastha leaders like the Kalakantas, like the Mahatmas, like the Vaisheshikas, like the Veerabahu Prabhus, like the Prithu Prabhu in his time, like the Chaitanya Charan Prabhu in Russia today. And interestingly enough, he's the one who wears Western clothes the most out of all the Grihastha gurus. He doesn't go as far as, completely dressing in Western clothes all day long, but at public programs, he'll wear pants and stuff. And lo and behold, he happens to have a huge following compared to other Grihastha gurus. Right? And that's in Russia. What to speak of Protestant America, where the Protestant, the predominant religious tradition in North America, again, is Protestant, evangelical, to be honest, Christianity, where the pastor is not distinguishable from anybody in the congregation until he opens his mouth and speaks. Right? That's the standard in North America. You want to change that, and you want to establish, a tradition where forget not just the householder grihastha, priests have to have a uniform, but even the congregation members have to have a uniform. And you think we're going to have success with that type of ambition in America? First of all, why? We see that that's not even justifiable in Scripture, nor in the example that Lord Chaitanya set. And secondly, even if it was justifiable, good luck in trying to implement it. It'll never work. It'll never work. So those are my few thoughts. Hare Krishna. Thanks for listening. And all glories to Prabhupada. And let us continue, regardless of however we dress, to chant the unifying mantra for all of humanity. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. All glories to Prabhupada.